Is the violence in Syria descending into a civil war? The leaders of the Syrian uprising always said they wanted a peaceful protest, but defectors from the Syrian army are fighting back. Where is Syria heading, and what can a divided international community do about it? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. International leaders keep saying they want urgent action to stop the bloodshed in Syria. Yet it's now nearly 8 months since the uprising started and the violence continues to escalate. A total of at least, and this is the UN estimate, 3,500 people killed. This month, November, has been the deadliest yet. At the beginning of the month, the Arab League drew up an ambitious peace plan. The Syria government said it would implement it, pulling out its security forces from towns and cities. And then it did virtually nothing. A day before another Arab League deadline runs out on Saturday, Syria has decided to accept an Arab League mission to observe the implementation of peace proposals aimed at ending violence, hoping to avoid further sanctions. An audacious attack by the Free Syrian Army, a group of defectors from the National Army on an intelligence base near Damascus earlier this week, has raised fears of a long and bloody civil war. Russia, Syria's most important international ally, has insisted the opposition is as much to blame as the Syrian government, adding that sanctions are not an option to solve the crisis. From Moscow, Niamh Barker.
We need to stop confrontation in Syria and to stop the dramatising of this situation and stop the arguments for intervention.
Resisting European pressure. Russia's foreign minister says sanctions against Syria are not an option. The situation in the country, he says, is starting to resemble civil war.
More and more groups of armed people have become involved with completely different ideas to reforms and democracy. Their agenda is inter-ethnic and inter-clan.
Russia blames players outside Syria of trying to escalate the violence to justify intervention. Moscow now says it supports plans to send observers from the Arab League to Syria, but remains firmly against calls for Assad to step down. An end to Assad's leadership is exactly what the EU is demanding.
The future of Syria now depends upon the ability of all of us to keep pressure on them, to see that there is a need to stop this violence, to listen to the people and to find a way to move forward. And I do hope that we will see significant movement in that direction in the next coming days.
Moscow believes a UN resolution against Syria will open the way for military intervention. The Kremlin's repeatedly warned Western powers against turning Syria into another Libya. But it also has national interests to protect in Syria. If the Assad leadership collapses, Russia stands to lose $2.5 billion worth of arms sales and contracts. The Russian Navy also plans to station warships permanently in the Syrian port of Tartus, the closest thing to a military base outside the former Soviet Union.
Well, Russia actually will lose a lot. In general, they don't have any other country to turn to.
Syria is one of the few allies that Russia has in the region. To abandon this ally now to international pressure could be seen as weakness here at home. And that's not the kind of signal that the Kremlin wants to send, less than a month away from parliamentary elections. Instead of sanctions, Russia continues to call on Syria to introduce reforms and for the opposition to hold talks with the authorities. Moscow wants no part in the fall of the Assad government. Niamh Barker, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
Joining us now, 3 guests from cities that could have real influence on future events. Cairo is the headquarters of the Arab League. From there, Mustafa, el-Labbad, director of the Al-Sharq Centre for Regional and Strategic Studies. Russia is Syria's most important international ally. In Moscow, we have Dimitry Babich, a political analyst at the Russia Profile magazine. And Turkey, with that long border with Syria, has become increasingly critical of its neighbour. In Istanbul, we're joined by Abdulhamit Bilici, economist for Today's Zaman and general manager of the Jinzan news agency. Welcome, gentlemen, to the programme. If I start with you, Mustafa, and ask you about the latest development, which is Syria saying it will allow in Arab League monitors. Do you think the Arab League is going to be happy with that?
I think before answering your question, we have to put the whole Syrian crisis in a framework where transparency is given. According to that, I think we can see three dimensions of the Syrian crisis. The domestic one, where the Syrian regime under Bashar al-Assad is opposing the opposition and facing people's uprising. And in the second level dimension, we have the regional one, where I can put your question in, or classify your question in that category. And the third one is the global international level. So the Syrian crisis is very complicated, and we cannot analyze only one level. So there is a dialectic connection between all three levels.
Well, you've categorized my question. Can you answer it now? Can you tell me, what do you think the Arab League response will be?
I think Arab League shifted its norms and values regarding to Syria. They suspended the Syrian membership in the Arab League because of internal troubles. We have till now the third shock in the history of Arab League. The first one was for Egypt, suspended after Camp David Treaty, and the second for Iraq after invading Kuwait 1990. And now we have suspending for Syria because of internal struggle and internal circumstances. That's historical phenomenon. Arabs are shifting their values and norms toward democracy and freedom. So they took the initiative, the Arab League, and I think they will coordinate and cooperate with the international community, with Turkey, to put more pressure on Syria. So I see the Syrian reaction as a weak. They must comply, but they won't, and they would made obstacles. They will say formally yes, but they will try to win time. So Arab League is aware of that, and I think Arab League would accept that, but set new conditions to be sure that this condition is complied by Syria fully and completely.
Abdulhamit in Istanbul, do you think that the Syrians are just playing for time?
I guess so. Turkey had very good intentions and asked Assad regime in Syria to change its approach, to start reform without falling into the position of Gaddafi or Mubarak or Ben Ali. But unfortunately, Assad regime wanted to win time and to delay as much as possible. Turkey was one of the most friendly countries to Syria until 2 or 3 months ago. But unfortunately, they did not understand their situation well, and they, instead of listening to their friendly country, friendly neighbor, they applied force, they used force against opposition, against people who are asking same things that were people asking in Tunisia, in Egypt, or in other countries. So I think their attitudes towards Arab League would not be different. So I am a bit pessimistic if those kind of things could help us to reach a solution that could save Syrian people and the Syrian nation. It's very difficult from the time that we lost more than 3,000 people, and I don't think that the people in Syria will accept such kind of health bargains.
Dimitry in Moscow, do you think this Arab League delegation of monitors, we hear it's going to be 500 monitors, are going to end up going to Syria? Because the Arab League wasn't only demanding that, it was demanding that tanks come off the streets, and there's no sign of that.
Well, I think Syria is very angry with the Arab League. I'm not sure they will be very welcome in Damascus after, the recent events when, the crowds loyal to Mr. Assad stormed some of the embassies of Arab League members. As for Russia, I don't think Russia supports Assad's regime. Russia supports stability. And Russia is afraid that after the revolution, okay, let's have a revolution there, you know, we had our own revolution and the consequences were very bad. We still remember that after almost 100 years. So Russian approach is, I would say, counter-revolutionary. We are afraid of destabilization. We don't want the country to fall apart. We don't want the minorities, including the ruling minority, the Alawites, to be persecuted. And this is the reason why Russia's approach is pretty conservative. Although I would remind you that our president, Dimitry Babich, very bitterly criticized Assad.
Mustafa, if we could peek behind the doors in Damascus, the doors of power, and see the advice that was going to President Assad, what do you think we'd see? Because we seem to have the Syrians changing their minds on this, saying at one point they accepted the peace plan, then not going to the summit in Rabat, and now saying monitors can come in.
I think Syria is thinking to refuse and to reject the Arab initiative. It would open the door for international intervention. That's exactly what the Syrians are not willing to accept. So they said tactically they are saying yes, but we can assume that they would delay. The position now in Syria, the situation is there is a stalemate. The regime is controlling the military security forces and they have their alliances, and the bourgeoisie, the merchant class in Aleppo and Damascus, the two big cities in Syria, are still not siding with the opposition. So the Syrian regime is technically for the time being now is able to keep the power, but balances are shifting and the opposition is growing and the international attention is growing as well. So they would accept in order to reject objectively. And Syrians are thinking as well that the regional level is playing a role as well. Turkey is heavily involved now in countering Assad regime, but Iran is supporting Assad regime, and Israel is thinking they can live with the Assad regime since there is a calm border between Israel and Syria since the last war, 1973. But at the same time, Israel is afraid if the regime changed in Syria and radical forces are coming to power, so they will not have this calm situation anymore. On the other hand, they would think if the Syrian regime changed, which is an important ally to Iran, then Israel would win, so Iran would lose. So we have a double-edged circumstances in Syria, and every regional power is looking to Syria. They have their benefits and they have their contradicted interests. Arabs, where traditionally the power centers are in Cairo and Riyadh, are witnessing now how Qatar is moving forward and taking the initiative and lead the Arab action with Egypt and Saudi Arabia together in order to put an end to the suppression of Syrian people. So balances within the Arab states are shifting, balances in the region are shifting because there is a very hard competition between Turkey and Iran over the dominance in Syria. I can remember a very famous book of Patrick Seal written in 1960s, The Struggle Over Syria, and I think the title of this book is still relevant to the crisis in Syria. We have a regional level which is really very determinant for the circumstances in Syria. In comparison to Libya, as example, Libya we had the domestic level and the international one. The regional powers like Algeria and Egypt didn't play a significant role. But in the case of Syria, we have heavy roles of Turkey and Iran. And
well, let me get on to that role of Turkey, and I'd like to ask Abdulhamit about Turkey. What's the next stage for Turkey? Because I do hear that there is some talk of setting up some sort of buffer zone, protection zone inside Syria being set up by the Turks. Is that under active consideration?
I guess it is one of the considered opinions, but not yet policy. As far as I know from the sources close to the government, they are considering creating such a buffer zone in a situation that we could have hundreds of thousands of people flooding from Syria. So as a prevention to such a situation, Turkey could handle such a policy. But
so how would that work? It'd be rather like the zone that was set up to protect the Kurds in northern Iraq. Would it be similar to that was set up in the early 90s?
It would be, yes, it would be similar. You know, in early 90s, there was 500,000 Kurdish people were getting away from Saddam, and they came across the Turkish border. So Turkey do not like to repeat that situation and like to stop such kind of people migration in masses in the Syrian side. So far until today, there is not such an idea. But
Dimitri,
sure
can I ask
Turkey
you how that would be seen in Moscow? Because some might see a protection zone becoming an opposition enclave, a bridgehead for the opposition forces.
Well, I think Moscow will be very cautious about it, because indeed Moscow is against any foreign intervention in the affairs of sovereign states. And certainly Syria-Turkish relations are a very complicated matter. We once got entangled in them. It was when Mr. Öcalan, you know, the leader of the radical Kurdish party, was expelled from Syria under pressure from Turkey, and he landed in Moscow. So we had lots of trouble with him before we managed to eject him to Italy. Russia is very, very unwilling to see the region destabilized. Also because Syria is a traditional ally. For decades it was the case that Israel was an ally of the United States and Syria was an ally of the Soviet Union. So basically Russia is very unwilling to see its old ally basically being toppled by lots of other countries.
Abdulhamit, of course, Turkey was a very close ally of Syria for a very long time, and it's quite remarkable to me how quickly things have changed, because there were strong political ties, there were even strong personal ties, weren't there, between the leaders?
Yeah, you are right. Two countries were the best friends until very recently. But Turkey made a very clear decision after Arab Spring that it will be with the side of people, not with the side of regime, which are using violence, oppression against very legitimate demands of people. So Turkey, in the beginning of the crisis, started and tried to be a bridge between two sides. I mean, between people and the regime. But unfortunately, the Assad regime or the Baas regime was not helpful in regard to taking necessary preventions or the precautions. But so far, Turkey made its position very clear, because otherwise it would be against the very experience of Turkey itself. Turkey is a democratic country and cannot be with a dictatorial regime or authoritarian regime.
Mustafa, can I ask you about that idea of a buffer zone that's being discussed in Turkey, certainly? How would that go down in Arab circles and among the Arab League? And could it just become a base for this Free Syrian Army, for these defectors, further militarizing the conflict?
I think Arab states are looking to the matter with different eyes. On one hand, Turkey is very important and very close to Arab countries, and Turkey has a long border with Syria, so they can achieve it theoretically. But I think in Arab circles, they are opposing Assad regime, but they have concerns about what after Assad regime. The Arabs witnessed a heavily Iranian influence in Iraq after Saddam Hussein, and certain circles in the Arab countries are thinking after Bashar al-Assad, they don't want to see Turkish influence or Turkish heavily involved in Syria, where Syria would be a backyard for Turkey. So Arab states and Turkey have common interest in opposing Assad regime, but I think in the long term they would have contradicted interest because Turkey is looking to Syria as its backyard, and this zone would be the start of a dramatic change in the Syrian circumstances where army officers and soldiers can go there and take protection, and even civil people in Syria. So nobody is supporting Syrian regime among the Arab countries, with a few exceptions, but nobody is willing to see Syria as a Turkish dominion after Bashar al-Assad. So the whole crisis is double-edged, and I think Arabs, even Russia and Turkey have common interests, but at the same time contradicted ones. For the time being, every party is seeking its common goals with others, but I think after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, which is practically the case, Bashar al-Assad cannot hold the power for so long time with only naked force. They have to have a political solution, and they are not capable to do that the whole last 8 months.
Dimitry, can I ask you about that? Bashar al-Assad won't survive. Can you tell us, if that is the case, why does Russia continue to back him? And is there a fear among some in Moscow that you might be on the wrong side of history here?
If Bashar al-Assad is toppled and there is no agreement among various opposition factions that topple him, I think the consequences will be terrible for everyone, and Russia is just unwilling to see that perspective. I think Israel is also unwilling, because who knows what will come from unstable Syria. So basically, Russia does not support Bashar al-Assad because he is a dictator. Russia, in fact, is just unwilling to see Syria disintegrating. Russia is unwilling to see a new revolution in Syria.
Surely what Russia wants to protect is its naval base. It's only poured on the Mediterranean and all those oil contracts, isn't it?
That base has not been used for a long time. It's an old asset that we probably needed during the Cold War, but we don't need it that much now. But certainly there is a long relationship, and Syria still owes us $11 billion, which it wrote, which we have agreed to write off 3 years ago, and there are new debts for all kinds of things that Russia has been selling to Syria. So there are commercial interests also. But the main problem now is not even commercial attitude, but security attitude. Syria is not too far from Russia's borders, after all. Before the Second World War, the French even contemplated, when Russia was in fact sort of an ally of Germany, the French even contemplated bombarding Azerbaijan from Syrian territory. So it's getting closer and closer to Russia's borders, and that also worries Russia.
Abdulhamit, can I ask you about one of those points that Dimitry raised there, which is without Assad there will be civil war and chaos. Quickly, your response to that.
I guess Assad is playing to that notion, because he says that other than me there is chaos. The alternative is chaos, which is not the case. And Tunisia is a very good example. In Tunisia, people got rid of their ruler, dictator, and now they have been able to elect their government and their parliament. And so far, so good. There is no contradictions or negative scenarios. But I would not agree with my friend from Cairo that Turkey is seeking kind of dominion in Syria by creating a buffer zone. No, Turkey has no desire to create such a buffer zone, but it feels that it may be under obligation to take some measures if certain situations emerge. So Turkey looking the region and to the Arab Spring on a value-based understanding that democracy and the freedoms are for the good of people and the region, and it's very difficult so far to continue stability with dictatorships. So this
Thank
is
you,
the notion,
Abdulhamit. And thanks to all our
which is very
guests
much
in
related to
Cairo,
Turkey's
Mustafa,
story.
el-Labbad in Moscow, Dimitry Babich, and in Istanbul, Abdulhamit Bilici. And thanks to you for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to get in touch with us, the email is the way to do it. Your thoughts, your suggestions, and if you must, your complaints, send them to insidestory@aljazeera.net. For now, bye-bye.